This episode of the Science of Skin podcast is brought to you by Cetaphil.
Hi, and welcome to the Science of Skin podcast. I'm Dr. Patti Farris, your co-host for this episode, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Ted Lain.
Hey, Patti.
So we are going to do a really interesting sort of historical view of one of the really legendary brands in dermatology. And I'm going to start by asking Ted to sort of clear up one of the age-old mysteries of dermatology. How do you pronounce it? Is it Cetaphil or is it Cetaphil?
So I think it's Cetaphil because it's the origin of the name is from cetal alcohol and phil, right? So cetal alcohol is derived from the Latin. I just did a deep dive on this, Patti, so I know all about
You
this.
must have. So if you're going to go into Latin, I'm getting worried.
I literally am. So cetal alcohol, right? It was first discovered by a scientist in like the 17 or 1800s who took whale oil in the head of the whale, okay? And he heated it up with potash and he got this waxy substance that was full of this fatty alcohol, and they called it cetal alcohol. Why cetal? Because ceta is it's Latin for whale oil.
Oh,
so that's
so
where
interesting.
we get. So thank you, ChatGPT. So cetal alcohol then, and phil just means love, right? It is the whatever the origin of love.
Term.
Okay, so ceta and phil, love, cetal alcohol, which is an interesting ingredient, isn't it?
Super interesting. I think we should probably just mention that these alcohols are not the type of alcohols that people fear in skincare products. And I think a lot of times, particularly non-physicians who are looking at the back of products, see the word alcohol and they immediately think of isopropyl alcohol or some of the drying forms of alcohol. But these are really more emulsifiers. They make the products richer and thicker. So they have a very important function in skincare formulation.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So the fatty alcohols are very long hydrocarbon chains with an alcohol at the end. That's why it's called an alcohol, because it has that hydroxyl group
that
at the end.
OH,
Yeah. But the shorter chain ones are more drying. The longer chain ones have a completely different use in the skin. And cetal alcohol is so interesting because it acts as a moisturizer. So it helps to lock in hydration. It acts as it actually acts as a hydrator as well. So it brings hydration in as a humectant. And then there's an emollient aspect to it. So it makes the skin feel smoother. It's an emulsifier. So it brings, it's amphipathic. So it brings oil and water together as an emulsification agent. So it is such an interesting ingredient, and certainly why it makes so much sense for it to be at the very core of a skincare brand meant for those with sensitive skin.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know you and I were chatting in our little pre-discussion that back in the day when I started practice, Cetaphil was really the skincare line for sensitive skin patients. And we used it for the cleansers, the moisturizers, the lotion for patients with sensitive skin, patients with cosmetic intolerance. Very widely used in our patients who had rosacea, because that cleansing process, it's really kind of a non-foaming cleanser.
Yeah.
And that cleansing process was just gentle. And we used it on patients with atopic dermatitis. It was really the go-to for a very long time for practicing dermatologists.
It's got that micellar or micellar technology to it.
Right.
It is essentially surfactant free. In the way that we think about surfactants, which are harsh cleansing agents. And because of that, you can apply Cetaphil cleanser and then you can take it off with a cotton swab.
Right.
Or a cotton ball. And it leaves a moisturizing cetal alcohol based moisturizer at the end. So it's both a moisturizer and a cleanser all in one. And I think that's the revolutionary part of it, is that it didn't have those harsh surfactants.
Right. I know you ChatGPT'd away on this, so tell us about the pharmacist who started Cetaphil. It's such an interesting story.
I don't know his or her name, but I know they're based in Texas, so must be really smart. And so in 1947, this pharmacist said, this cetyl alcohol or cetyl alcohol, which is kind of a combination fatty alcohol, is a great ingredient. Let's include that in the Cetaphil cleansing lotion, which now today is called the Cetaphil Gentle Skin Cleanser. And he launched it. And it started to kind of gain popularity, as you mentioned, in around the mid 50s. I mean, he launched it in the late 40s, so it took some time, but started to gain some popularities in our dermatology colleagues and the healthcare professionals. And then word of mouth happened, and it spread like wildfire. In 1960, it was super popular. In 1995, it became more of an international brand. And then in 2021, there was some reformulation that happened to add a few new ingredients and just kind of reformulate and keep it up with the times.
Yeah. And I really think that is maybe missed on some of the dermatology community, is just the innovation that occurred back in the early 2021 reformulations, where they really started turning their eye on barrier function and making sure the barrier was maintained, better humectant ingredients. So they added, I know they added glycerin, they added niacinamide to the formulation, and they were really they also, as you mentioned, cetyl alcohol, which is a combination of cetyl alcohol and stearyl alcohol. So two of these fatty alcohols together. They also added panthenol, which we know is a really good moisturizing and gentle, soothing ingredient for the skin. So they sort of started looking for things that would enhance the OG formula, but also kind of a cleaner approach. I know there were parabens that were taken out. Poor parabens, thrown under the bus, under the bus. But everybody was doing it. So, as I hear so many formulators say, we use preservatives that aren't even as good, but still, parabens, I know, were removed from this formulation. So it really became a cleaner, more hydrating, barrier supporting formulation, both the cleansers and the moisturizing cream and the lotion.
It certainly did. And I think, as I mentioned, there was just some themes that were happening in the early 2020s that I think are continuing on today, where people wanted, clean skincare.
Right.
And there was this big drive on social media to remove parabens, which doesn't make any sense. As you just mentioned, parabens are in blueberries, right? They're such a natural product, but okay, we can remove that. And they certainly have the scientists and the formulators to do that. And unfortunately, anytime you have a water-based cleanser or water-based lotion, you're going to need a preservative of some type. Otherwise, you're going to grow all sorts of nasty
bacteria.
Stuff. So preservatives are always going to be needed. So they had to, reformulate. And when they started to reformulate, like you said, glycerin makes so much sense as a wonderful humectant to add. I think what they did is they bolted on ingredients to that cetyl alcohol as almost like an Iron Man suit, just to make it better.
Right.
It just, glycerin is a humectant. Exactly what cetyl alcohol is. It just makes it better. Niacinamide, well, as you call it, Patti, I love this, the gentle giant of skincare.
It's such a good ingredient. It does so many things.
So that makes a lot of sense at a low concentration. So make sure that it doesn't cause irritation. Then, panthenol, provitamin B5 is a skin protectant and an emollient. And so again, just kind of adding on ingredients, reformulating to take away things that the general population just thought wasn't great. And it just, in my view, it made the products just better and modernized the products. And I think they're great now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
This episode of the Science of Skin podcast is brought to you by Cetaphil.
I also think when we used to talk about Cetaphil, we talked of it as a bland moisturizer. And as you know, it was very often used in studies for that reason, because it was a go-to for people who were doing cosmetic studies, because they could use it sort of with whatever their active was, with whatever their hero ingredient was they were testing, because it was a bland moisturizer. Now I think we've transgressed above that. We've come to a place where Cetaphil has so many actives, good active ingredients in it that we really now are supporting the barrier. We're giving that added hydration. I know it's got long hydration studies showing more long-term hydration. And so I think it's a kind of should be a go-to for any conditions where barrier dysfunction is a problem. Our acne patients, patients on retinoids, our rosacea patients, of course, our atopic patients. I love the good old Cetaphil cream, the big jar of Cetaphil cream, such a great product and has so many good ingredients for the patients who really are at risk for barrier dysfunction.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. The more we learn about the barrier, Patti, don't you feel like I'm not even sure what a normal barrier is anymore? Because I feel like almost everybody has an impaired barrier. I mean, there's always an opportunity to improve your barrier. Okay. And so, using products, even if you feel like you have normal skin, using products like Cetaphil, it's not a bad idea because there's always the opportunity to make your barrier happier, healthier, make it more resilient so that if you do go skiing this winter and you're out in the sun and the wind and the cold, you won't get that prolonged redness and itching and inflammation, for example. Or in the summertime, if you're outside at the beach and again, the warmth and the wind and all that sun, it makes your skin more resilient. So we talk about all these different conditions that have impaired barrier, but I'm pretty sure that we all have impaired barrier at one point or another. And so it's just a good idea to support it.
I think it's true. And that's why we tell our patients with acne that they have to use moisturizers and, how important it is, even though they think they shouldn't put a moisturizer on, how important that is. And I think we can't underestimate that so many of our medications, we mentioned retinoids, but there's plenty of other ones that can be irritating and compromise the barrier. So sometimes being proactive and being on these products over a period of time can help mitigate some of that retinoid dermatitis or post-acne treatment. Benzoyl peroxide certainly can be irritating and lots of other things that we use on our patients. So I think being proactive is important. And you make a good point about the seasonal variations at certain times of year when the humidity gets low and you start losing more water to the environment, which we know happens. Those are really good times this time of year to really pump up with some of these products like Cetaphil that really can help you with barrier repair.
I think there's, we could even reframe it in terms of, longevity and regenerative medicine, which I think a lot of us are really focused on now, consumer and healthcare practitioner alike.
100%.
If your barrier is impaired, you're probably going to lose your what's called redox homeostasis, which means that you're going to lose the ability to quench all the free radicals in your skin. And when you are out of balance, then all these reactive oxygen species are trying to grab electrons, and they're making more reactive oxygen species, which just lead to damage in so many ways. One, collagen is damaged, but also your DNA can get damaged from reactive oxygen species, and you age.
Yeah,
you age because of an imbalance. So even if you want to think of it in terms of longevity and anti-aging or prevention of aging, treating aging as a disease, your barrier fits right into that. And so again, another reason to focus on products that help support the barrier, especially with the gentle skin cleanser like Cetaphil. And then I love the lotion and the moisturizing cream, but my goodness, we could go on and on about all the different products they have in their portfolio.
Yeah, they've got quite a large portfolio. I mean, I think the other thing to be said is when the barrier gets compromised, you trigger inflammation. And we talk so much about inflammaging and also the notion that inflammation in the skin affects you systemically as well. So this is so important. So I think barrier function is becoming, it might have been years ago, something we kind of talked about in passing and moisturizing, but now it's front and center. And it really is the interface between us and the environment. And anything that compromises it is going to cause problems in the epidermis, in the dermis, and probably even systemically.
I love that idea of focusing on the inflammaging and the fact that, look, we're talking about anti-inflammatory diets, and you know, take these supplements to help decrease inflammation, and you meditate and you try and decrease your stress. Well, it all starts with the skin. Let's just be honest. And you could say it starts with the gut, which is fine, but the gut is just skin turned inside out. So
I
I
love
mean,
that. It's so true. They're such a mirror image of each other,
Yeah.
aren't they?
Yeah.
We also should give a shout out to the peri and postmenopausal crowd, you know, because that is becoming also a really big group of patients that need guidance for barrier repair. I mean, your skin gets so dry in menopause. It is one of the most incredible things that happens. And sometimes the first thing that people notice are skin changes with menopause. And so certainly some products that contain ingredients like glycerin, like niacinamide, like these alcohols that are, you know, fatty alcohols that are so moisturizing. This is a great product. And I love the price point of it too. I mean, it's so great if you can afford an uber expensive moisturizer, but half of what you're paying for, you and I both know, is packaging and marketing. And look, you know, there's a lot of good products, as we know, at retail for very good price. And Cetaphil is one of those lines.
I was just at a conference, and I was moderating a panel on professionally dispensed skincare. And I had to say at the beginning of the panel, because we work so much with different companies and we know about all the technology behind these great, you know, great price point products, and how much science is underneath those, right? Just acting as a foundation for their efficacy. And I kind of feel like the science that is underlying both the mass consumer brands and then the professionally dispensed brands, it's almost like a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? Everybody is relying on the science now.
For sure.
And Cetaphil, as we just mentioned, the reformulation that just happened, it's all about the science.
Absolutely. And we'll tease at some upcoming episodes where we're going to dive into the science, looking at the studies, looking at the moisturization studies, looking at the studies in use of Cetaphil products in special populations. And we'll be coming to you with a couple more episodes on this subject, because it's way more than we could cover in one episode. But I think this is a good way to start, Ted, where we talk about the heritage of the line and why dermatologists still value this line, because it's been a go-to for us for so many years, and it's been a star performer for so many years in the dermatologist practice. And if it's part of your therapeutic armamentarium when you begin practice, I always say that's the time to get people, you know, engaged with your product and to show them the science behind it, because those products take you through your, you know, your life cycle of your practice. And I love that they've innovated over the years and done all of these great upgrades to, you know, the OG formulas, which were good, but the new formulas are just embellished and better.
Yeah, I think there's so much focus on sensitive skin and the barrier now, as we've been discussing, and it all goes back to that 1947 introduction of the initial sensitive, gentle skin cleanser. Because
as much as I study sensitive skin, Ted, I still have questions as to why so many, over 50% of female patients coming into our doors will say they have sensitive skin. You don't hear it as much from the male population, but it is a huge complaint of female patients.
Yeah, and we have that to, you know, we owe that form, I guess, that focus on sensitivity and trying to help those patients who do profess to have sensitive skin to Cetaphil.
To this pharmacist way back in 1947 who identified the need.
Yeah. You know,
it's a fascinating story. It's a really interesting story.
Yeah. I'm not sure he knew how many people had sensitive skin at that time, but it certainly opened the doors to dermatologists understanding it better and much more research into it. And then we have all these new product lines and competitors to Cetaphil that came out focusing on the sensitive skin patients. So if there was ever a heyday for sensitive skin, it's right now.
Yeah.
And certainly we have the products in the Cetaphil line to focus on those patients who have the sensitive skin to really help make your skin, as I said, I just love the idea of more resiliency with skin. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, to repair the barrier. So yeah, I think, you know, we just wanted to lay the foundation for the brand and make people understand the rich heritage here. And then we'll kind of move forward into a lot more science. We're going to focus on a few studies to support its use. And of course, our last episode, we're going to answer questions, Patti. So if anybody here has questions about either Cetaphil or sensitive skin, send us an email, questions@scienceofskinsummit.com. That's questions@scienceofskinsummit.com. And we'll get to your questions in our last episode. And you never know, we may call you up and kind of ask you to give us your ideas behind the question, and we can talk through it on the podcast as well. So go ahead and give us a shout with your emails and make sure we get your questions answered.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for listening. We look forward to bringing you some more scientific information and exciting innovations from Cetaphil. Thanks so much.
This episode of the Science of Skin podcast was brought to you by Cetaphil.